When I was 22, I wanted to get an MFA. I wanted to write short stories and be like a professor somewhere or something like that. And I gave up that dream to go to Wall Street. The first thing I had to learn was that there are no rules. How you make money in the markets is by being irrational and profiting off of the irrationality of others. You typically have a choice, and it's binary. You can either be critically successful or you can be commercially successful, but you usually can't be both. When you get to be like 50, you start to think about your impact, right? Your impact on other people, your impact on the world, and what is your contribution? Like, what are you leaving behind after you die? And what I am leaving behind is stuff like this.
Welcome to The Intentional Investor with Matt Zeigler, where he and his guests explore the intersection of investing and life, portfolio, and purpose. Nothing in this podcast is investment advice. Nothing in this podcast is advising you to buy or sell any security or to do anything with your money. Seriously, you should only act on investment advice from someone you know and who knows your unique situation. We are not that person. Matt Zeigler is a managing director at Sunpoint Investments, and the opinions expressed on this show do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Sunpoint Investments or of Second Foundation Partners. Securities discussed in the podcast may be holdings of Sunpoint Investments.
You are watching The Intentional Investor right here on Epsilon Theory YouTube, and I'm your host, Matt Zeigler. Now, my guest today, Pigpen to Fintwit's Peanuts for his ability to dirt nap. The one part Tasmanian devil of literature, second part Eurasian two-ring circus devil from his musical hideaways. I'd like to think he's rough around the edges, maybe even a touch on the shaggy side, but not Zoinks, Scoob, Shaggy. This is more Mr. Boombastic Shaggy, Mr. Stochastic Shaggy. One with no worries, no concern for the blessings of the Casey Kasems of the world. One who's all about the ludicrousness when it comes to business priorities. Sort of a lady on the podcasts and a freak in the street, if you will. But also one who's about the art, one who's never going to let those bastards grind him down because all the evil of this world is in too much that he can't squeeze a few pages of good art out of it. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, he's got all the rage of Tom Morello, and thank the Ivy League gods for my sake today. He's got more than the education of Tom Morello in so many ways. Investor, trader, author, musician, consumer of cat psychic services, Mr. Jared Dillian. Welcome to the show.
That is the most amazing intro I have ever gotten. That is insane. How much time did you spend on it?
Severe ADHD. I had a strong desire to get these things right.
How did you find out about the cat psychic?
Yeah, again, severe ADHD and just pawn through some old, pun intended, pawn through some old podcasts.
Yeah.
Good time. How's the cat psychic? How are the cats doing before we get into some
The
stuff?
cats are good. I haven't talked to the psychic in 3 or 4 months. I gotta hook up with her again. The cats are good. I have 7 cats. So,
and the cat psychic was a positive experience. That's my understanding here.
It is incredible. So
I don't doubt it.
Yeah,
the slightest. I think that's awesome. And I'm a believer. I take it you are too. Like you're a believer in communication, perhaps cross species and whatever else. Like this is an actual thing people can do.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because I have a subscriber to my newsletter. He'd been a subscriber for many years and he knows that I have a lot of cats. And he said, you really need to talk to my wife. And she does telepathy and distance Reiki and stuff like that. And, I'm not one of these extremely rational people. Like I do have some supernatural beliefs, but I was skeptical and I said, no, I forget it. And he kept harassing me. And he said, finally, she'll give you a free appointment. Just try it out. I'm like, okay. And this is one of my things. I don't know if you saw my recent essay about contempt prior to investigation, right? Where as human beings, we shut ourselves off to new things. We say, I don't like house music. I don't like short stories. I don't like this. I'm not going to try that. And so finally I just said, yes, I like to say yes to things. And I tried it and it's incredible. It's for real. So
here's the saying. Yes. Here's to, I can't tell you this, but contempt prior to investigation, and great because nice essay, by the way, but also one of the themes that just comes out over and over again on this podcast, you're possibly the third guest to actually bring that up, which is, I'm not surprised by it. I'm not surprised by it. So congrats, new book, Night Moosh. Great.
Yes.
Put my Amazon review up the other day. Loving
Saw
this.
that. Thank you.
We got a nice little Tom Morello shout out. That's direct from one of the lines in the book. So shout out to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania too, and York and all the good places. I want to read something just from the intro because I just want to talk about this first. Because this was a almost spit out the coffee laughing moment. I put this on Twitter too. The art world is filled with fart-smelling tastemaker critics, and the literary world is now no different, but you can't install a word salad in your corporate headquarters. I mean, okay, why'd you get the blessing of the MFA to be able to write something like that down?
I mean, look, like I was a very good student at SCAD. I went to Savannah College of Art and Design for my MFA. I went at age 46. I went very late. And some of the professors was wondering why I was doing this. And I'm sort of a dissident in the literary world, I believe that, here's what's going on. So writers are talking to each other, right? They're not talking to readers, okay? So people are publishing short stories and essays in literary magazines, and they're not meant to be read by the general public. They're meant to be read by other writers, right? And it's just this whole community of people that are talking to themselves. And it didn't always used to be that way, Like in the 90s, you could pick up a literary magazine and enjoy a story that had plot and characters and an arc and a resolution. And now it's a lot of postmodern crap. So, I submitted these stories to a bunch of lit mags, and one of them got accepted, but it really got accepted because I knew the editor. So it kind of doesn't count. And so really they were mostly rejected by everywhere. But the thing is that, I've sold a bunch of copies of Night Moves and people love it. It's got great reviews on Amazon. I get great reviews all the time. If I gave these people a copy of Granta or the Paris Review or Plowshares or Tin House or something like that, and if they read the stories, they'd be like, what the hell? Like, I don't get it, So I don't know. Like, some people say my writing isn't literary. I think it is. But I just, I am a real storyteller. Like that's what I focus on. So
I want to take you here next. And we'll get back into some other stuff too, but I think this says something about you that I want to kind of preface the rest of this conversation with. And this was an old post. You literally said you wanted to be the best writer's favorite writer. To me, that would be the greatest thing in the world. And I love this attitude of like, I want to be my favorite writer's favorite writer, and I want to differentiate between the literary magazine writer's favorite writer versus like the people you actually admire.
Yeah.
What's that mean? And parse that difference, because I think that's one of the things that's lost for people who don't care about maybe short fiction as much as you and I do.
It's kind of this, you typically have a choice and it's binary. You can either be critically successful or you can be commercially successful, but you usually can't be both, right? Like Taylor Swift is commercially successful, okay? Einstürzende Neubauten is critically successful. They are not commercially successful, right? And there's not too many people where you have an overlap, So, I am a commercially successful writer, and I've always wanted to be a critically successful writer. My favorite writer is a guy named Barry Hannah, okay, who passed away about 10 years ago. He was from Mississippi, he lived in Oxford. He wrote a bunch of novels, a bunch of short stories. The fascinating thing about Barry Hannah is no book of his ever sold more than 7,000 copies, right? But if you talk to all the great writers, they would say that Barry Hannah was their favorite writer, right? He's in Cooperstown. He's the best of all time. Just a genius, just an absolute genius, So I've always wanted to have that kind of critical success. I'm probably not going to get it in my lifetime, but there's this, I'm trying to, Christopher Nolan is somebody who is critically successful and commercially successful, right? He's one of the few people that can do that, right? Everybody wants to be Christopher Nolan. Like everybody wants to be him, you know?
I love the Christopher Nolan reference as somebody who's bridged the gap. I want to give you this too. And this is a Barry Hannah thing. And I think I only ever discovered Barry Hannah because of some professors and other people who put me onto him in the early 2000s. And this comes from, let's see, Yonder Stands Your Orphan. So this is, I think, early 2000s.
That was his last novel. It was like 2010, 11, something like that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And I remember anyway, this is from a clip from that. It was, you need to see a bit of hell now and then, that and great joy. I feel like you understand that quote better than most, perhaps. Like, well, what is it about his actual words? Get away from just like him as like the person that your favorite writer's favorite writer would call him that. But
well, one of the things I like about Barry Hannah is that time is nonlinear, right? So he'll be writing a story and he'll have one paragraph that spans 40 years. And in the next paragraph will span 4 seconds, and it's, and he just does it. He's not trying to do it. He just does it naturally. And a lot of, I'm not that good. I'm not comparing myself to him. Like he's the best. But most people, when they write, time is linear, so that's one out of many things that I like about him. But the best story he's done is Testimony of Pilate. I don't know if you've read that, but
I think that was my intro to him, was reading that one, and that's devastating in all the best ways.
Yeah.
Contains the line, I also just jotted this down. It's in my notes. I don't remember this from memory, but I am a dragon, America the beautiful, like you will never know.
Yeah.
Just like, God damn it. God damn. All right, take me all the way back in time now. Eastern Connecticut, born and raised. Are you Norwich all the way through?
Mostly. So my parents divorced when I was 7. My dad was a Coast Guard officer. He was an aviator. And so I was born in Cape Cod. I moved to Kodiak, Alaska. I moved to Clearwater, Florida. And then I moved to Governor's Island in New York. So when I was like 5, 6, 7 years old, I actually lived in New York City, which was pretty cool. This is like 79 through 81 when this is like Taxi Driver, New York, Travis Bickle, like It was
madness, New York.
Yeah. And my parents got divorced and I moved to Connecticut with my mom. I grew up with my grandmother and I grew up in a town called Norwich, Connecticut. And Norwich is a pretty interesting town. It's had good times and bad times. The good times were in the 60s and 70s. There was a lot of economic growth. There's about 35,000 people who lived there. After I left, they got the casinos. They got Foxwoods and Mohegan Sun, which everybody thought would be an economic boom, but it actually didn't turn out that way. So the city has been mismanaged for decades. A lot of poverty. It's a tough place, And my wife is from York, and we always used to compare towns. We always used to compare notes on our hometowns because York in the 80s and 90s was a tough place. But then it became sort of a bedroom community for Baltimore. And taxes were lower in Pennsylvania, so people would live across the border. And York really boomed while Norwich actually languished. Norwich did not do so well. So,
and they both of those places come out. I think this is interesting because this becomes part of your informed view, especially now that I have the late 70s to early 80s New York City experience.
Yeah.
Norwich is that weird combination of where you can still see the relic of all the things that worked once, and then they all stop working. And so you're growing up staring at, is it 2 rivers or 3 rivers? There's a bunch of
3
things
rivers.
Yeah. So like Norwich, what did it mean? Like growing up with grandma, like just how you visually take that city in is not a normal experience for most people.
Well, the one thing about Norwich is that the public education is outstanding. There's a high school there called Norwich Free Academy, which is literally like a college campus. It's very much like a college campus. There's a museum. They have a great arts program. They have a great music program. And what's unique about that school is that it's actually run by a private corporation, but it's open to the public. It takes everybody, and the surrounding towns pay tuition to the school, but it's not subject to the political whims of a board of education, right? And it is an incredible school. Wally Lamb, you're familiar with Wally Lamb?
I know that name. Yeah.
Yeah, he wrote "She's Come Undone."
Okay.
I Know This Much Is True, a bunch of books. He was one of my English teachers at Norwich Free Academy. So
Did you go, is that like middle school and high school? Is it just high school?
high school.
Okay. And the arts community is a big part of that too. Like you did some music training in the area or directly through the school?
Through the school, it had the school had a big marching band, and I was drum major of the marching band. And also, while I was in high school, my high school job was I was a church organist.
Okay.
So
Playing.
So I had played piano since I was like 5 years old. I was a very good pianist, and I learned how to play the church organ. So when I was like 16 years old, I was playing at this Unitarian church in town, and playing hymns and preludes and postludes, and I would make $50 for a service, and that would be gas money. So
That's fantastic. How are the feet with the pedals still? You still got that talent?
I don't know. I haven't done it in 30 plus years. So, but yeah, the church organ is hard. Yeah.
That's a real instrument. And like Bach, fugues, like stuff like that. What kind of music are you playing in a Unitarian church besides just the hymnal?
The funny thing is I was playing Bach fugues. I was. Yeah.
It's the standard if you have an organ in the church.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's amazing. I'm just curious, especially because the drum major thing and the piano and the church organ, you had a sense of both musicality and rhythm early on. Did that just click for you automatically? Was that you just like latched into that?
Yeah. I don't know. Like I've always been musically talented. Actually, I took up the guitar about a year or two ago, and the guitar is a monkey instrument. Like it's not meant to be played by human beings. Like it's very hard. Yeah. And now I DJ, as you said, stochastic. So, that's the music I do nowadays. So,
And I say this because I think this is interesting. This is a detail that I didn't totally know about you before I started to do some homework on this. It makes so much more sense because in your written communications and other stuff, you are more rhythmically aware than most writers. That's one of the things that I think stands out your fiction, especially. Your sense of rhythm and how to change up rhythm is not normal in the best of ways.
It's funny. So in 2009, I was basically recruited by a literary agent to write Street Freak. Most people spend their whole lives trying to query literary agents, and one just came to me. And the way he described my writing was that I had insane flow, and I don't really know where that comes from. Like I don't know. Like how do you describe flow? Like I just, I'm very conscious of the way words sound in your head. You know what I mean? So,
but I'm going to emphasize this for the eighth of a human who cares about this watching, but it's really cool because this makes sense as the drum major and the piano thing, because those are both percussive instruments, right? Like inside of the piano are little mallets hitting the strings. It also makes sense that you would describe guitar as a monkey instrument because guitar is like the bastard child. It doesn't have the percussive nature of the piano. Like there's not the mallets and I hit the thing and the sound comes out, and it doesn't have the bow of a violin or something else.
Yeah.
So this drum major and piano awareness, like it leads a person you have to construct things in a different, very time-oriented way when you learn an instrument like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, I went to the Coast Guard Academy, and I continued to do music. They had a German bugle corps, not a marching band. So I was in the drum line for 3 years, and then I was drum major of the German bugle corps too. So
Where's Coast Guard Academy? Is this still here? Is this
it's in Connecticut. It's in New London, which is only about 15 miles
there you
away.
go.
Yeah.
How'd that happen? They recruit you out of school. Did you go for it?
Well, what happened was, I was big into math, and I wanted to go to MIT, but I was kind of a slacker in high school, so my grades weren't good enough. So my second choice was WPI, Worcester Polytech.
Great school.
It's also a great school, and I got accepted. And then when the financial aid package came, my mom balked, and she refused to pay for me to go to WPI, which meant that my choice was basically UConn. I didn't want to go to UConn because, UConn has gotten better over the years, but at the time it didn't have a very good reputation. So I said, screw you, I'm going to school for free. And I applied to the Coast Guard Academy and got accepted. So, but it's not really free. It's like a $200,000 education shoved up your ass a nickel at a time. So
The human piggy bank. Jared Dillian. Take that, Jesse Livermore's cost of tuition. So then what, like, you stick around, you do this, you get that education. We won't review the ways that you received it exactly, but you get that education. What happens next? How do you come out of that school?
I went to sea. I was on a Coast Guard cutter at Washington State for 2 years. Did mostly fisheries, law enforcement. So I was a deck watch officer. I was a weapons officer. I was a first lieutenant. I was a boarding officer. And then after that, I went to Alameda, California, which is where the Coast Guard Pacific Area headquarters is. And I was in intelligence. So I was an intelligence analyst for 3 years.
So many questions about intelligence analyst. Rewind one step for me. How'd you do with just like the rank order and structure? Is that something you fit into naturally, or is that something that irked you? How'd you deal with that?
The structure of the military was not a problem for me. One of the things about the Coast Guard and the military in general is that your performance is largely dictated by who you're stationed with and who your commanding officer is. So if you have a commanding officer that is good and you get along with, then you can have a good tour and you can get a good tour after that and a good tour after that. But if you have a commanding officer that you dislike or you butt heads with, then that's pretty much the end of your career. And as a 23-year-old, I was looking at this and I said, I really wanted to be an admiral. That's kind of the goal. Like, you want to be an admiral. And I said, there's too much luck involved for me. I wasn't confident that if I worked the hardest and did the best job, that I would become an admiral. Like, there was just too many vagaries. So
then how do you end up in Almeida and doing the spycraft?
Yeah, it sounds sexy, but I did some good work there. One of the things that we were focused on was high seas drift net fishing. And a drift net is a net that's made out of fishing line, basically. It's this monofilament fishing line. So this was a big problem in the world in like the 80s and 90s. You had these drift net fishers, they'd throw this net overboard and it would catch everything. It would catch marine life, it would catch marine mammals, it would catch turtles, it would just kill everything. And it doesn't decompose, so it just kind of floats around the ocean and just keeps killing everything. So the United Nations banned drift net fishing, right? So whenever the United Nations does something, it typically falls on the US to enforce it, right? Like, we were the only ones enforcing it. So, but that was one of my main jobs, was finding the drift net fishing boats and sending Coast Guard assets out to bust them and seize their boats and whatever. So, it was really fun.
Is that your first, I don't want to call it management experience, but kind of like what you just said, like pointing assets towards a problem, saying like, I found this thing and now I have to get these people on board. I'm sure there's some paperwork and other things involved to say, now go off and accomplish this thing.
My only job was to find the bad guys, right? Like, the captain and the admiral, like they were the ones that were sending assets out to, like, my job was to say, okay, based on the sea surface temperature and the time of year and where fish migrate, this is where the boats are likely to be, plus the secret stuff that we were using. And, then they would send out boats and planes to go catch them.
So when do you decide you don't want to be an admiral, or there's too much luck involved with the next step up and it's time for you to do something else?
I actually decided that pretty early on, like my first year out in the Coast Guard. And so I was in this town called Port Angeles, Washington, and it's out on the Olympic Peninsula, and it's even more of a depressed place than Norwich. But they had a bookstore, and I found myself buying and reading all the financial books in the bookstore. So the first one I read, I just came across this. It was like a random walk down Wall Street, Burton Malkiel. And, I'm 22 years old and I buy this book and I'm like, this is the biggest load of crap I have ever seen. Like, I can't believe this is a book. Like, this is the dumbest thing I've ever seen. Like, and I didn't have any training. I wasn't educated in markets. I didn't even have a brokerage account at the time. But I said, market efficiency is the dumbest idea I've ever heard.
Right.
So at that point, I wanted to be a trader and basically disprove market efficiency. Right. That was my goal. So
why is any early 20 something reading the finance section? What, like, you could have picked cooking, you could have picked nature. Why the finance shelf?
So what happened was, I was on the ship and we were in San Diego, and one of my officer friends, this guy named Adam, he went out into town and he went to one of those newspaper vending machines and he got a newspaper and he brought it back to the ship, and we're sitting in the wardroom and he's looking at the business section. So I said to him, like, what are you doing? Right. And he says, I'm looking up my mutual funds. So this is before the internet. I mean, The internet was around, but nobody was using it for that. And if you wanted to look up stock quotes or mutual funds, you would look it up in the newspaper, So I said, what's a mutual fund? I didn't know what a mutual fund was. And he gave me this half-ass explanation. It's like a basket of stocks. It's a fund, whatever. I didn't know. So I was like, how much money are you making on that? He says, well, I'm making like 15 or 20%. And I'm like, well, I'm getting 5% in the bank account. So this sounds cool, right? So yeah, part of it was greed. I was motivated by greed. I wanted to make, and this was also 1996, 97. So it was a bull market, and, obviously he was making money. So yeah.
So you end up taking an interest. What bridges the gap though between effectively box scores for funds and stuff? Because that's basically what they were on those lists and lists of tables for people who don't remember them. Like what bridges? I really want to know, how does that connect to picking up Malkiel? Like that's still a jump.
I think I just saw the book A Random Walk, and I was a math major, so
okay.
I
so like
I
Brownian motion or something weird, like is in the back of your mind. All right, that makes a little more sense. Yeah. What was the second book? Like after that, so you're like, this is a load of crap. Put that book down. What's the next book you pick off?
The second book was Bogle on Mutual Funds. Jack Bogle.
I bet you love that one.
Yeah.
So if you threw Burton Malkiel as the dumbest thing you ever said, dare I ask what the reaction to Bogle was?
Yeah, I mean, I disagreed with all of it. And like I said, I didn't know why. So
what is it about like trusting your gut on something like that? I don't want to call back to cat psychic for a second, but I want to say there's something about, I distrust this or I disbelieve this. And you seem comfortable with that state of disbelief in a cool way.
Yeah, well, I still don't believe in market efficiency. I've outperformed the market by quite a bit over the years, just myself. which we may or may not get into how, but it's I believe, and I have always believed, that the markets are made up of human beings who are emotional and irrational. And basically, the conventional wisdom is that you can succeed in the markets by being more rational than everybody else, right? You say, here's a stock, it's mispriced. I'm going to buy it. It'll return to fair value. Like I am more rational than the market. The market is irrational. Like it doesn't work. It doesn't work. How you make money in the markets is by being irrational and profiting off of the irrationality of others, right? These swings and waves of emotion, So
What's the connection? I love that, by the way. I'm sure we're going to come back to this. What's the connection then between you start to read these books, you start to have these interests, and now it's time to get out of the Coast Guard?
Yeah, so I applied to a couple of business schools. So basically, my wife, I got married very young. I got married when I was 23. She's an archaeologist, and she graduated from Penn, and she wanted to go to Berkeley to get her PhD. So I had to get stationed in San Francisco somehow. And I was applying to Berkeley and University of San Francisco for business schools.
How'd you meet your wife? Where'd you meet her?
We were 15 years old at like a gifted and talented camp when we met. So we've been together for like 35 plus years. So
that's amazing. Okay. Awesome. Back to California.
Yeah. So Berkeley wasn't going to work because it wasn't going to fit with my Coast Guard schedule. So I just applied to USF and I got in, and it was a very good program. I got a great education. When I got to Lehman Brothers, I found out that I actually got a better education than most everybody that went to Ivy League schools. They were spending most of their time at recruiting events, with like Miller Lite and chicken on a stick and like schmoozing people. And I was actually learning. And anytime that I was not in the class, I was in the library reading books on option pricing and bonds and stuff like that. So I got a great education. So
it's interesting how and I know you talk about this in No Worries, and you don't have to jump into this part yet unless you want to comment on it. If you pick one of those big name schools, you're really paying for the network and you want to get the network value out of it. If you're going in the other direction, like you kind of chose to network with the library shelves.
Yeah.
Like you chose to actually learn something to make the most out of the extra time you were afforded because you weren't chasing chicken on a stick.
Yeah.
How conscious is that at the moment?
That was a bad decision. So I took the very hard path to Wall Street. The easy path would have been to go to NYU or Columbia or MIT or something and get hired at a recruiting event. And, that would have been the easy path. I took the hard path. I talk to young kids all the time and I tell them that the name brand of the school really matters. And if you want to do this the easy way instead of the hard way, pay the money and go to a name brand school, go to an Ivy League school, and you'll have a straight shot to Wall Street.
So you're saying your chosen almost random walk to end on Wall Street was not the best path you could have.
No, it was not the best path. No.
Sounds irrational to me. I don't know what I'm doing. But you end up there. So what's the connection then from business school to Lehman? Was that a step direct?
Yes. Yeah.
So how do you end up at Lehman? Who's the person who's like, you, sir, you, Mr. Dillian, you now belong here? What's the in the door for Lehman?
Well, there was another ex-Coast Guard guy at the firm who I was networking with, and he was able to get me an interview. And beyond that, I don't really know what he did, but I did really well in the interviews and got hired, so.
What's your sense? Like, if you put yourself in the hiring manager's shoes, what did they see in you versus the next, hey, you got to talk to this kid here from NYU that we really like? And why'd they pick you?
Well, the main reason was, when I was in San Francisco, I got a job on the P-Coast Options Exchange, as a clerk. I was working for this firm called BOTA. BOTA stands for Best Options Traders There Are. And I'm not kidding. Like, it's true.
Humble brag.
So I was working for this market making firm. And basically I was getting up at like 3:45 in the morning and going to the floor, getting there at like 5:30, and I would work until noon. And then I would come back and do my Coast Guard job from like 1 until 10 o'clock at night. And then I would go home and study from like 10 until 1 or 2 in the morning. And I would sleep 2 hours a night. So for 2 years I did this, and my whole pitch to Lehman or all the other banks was, I am an animal and I can work harder than anybody else. Like, I am doing this to get a job on Wall Street. So
It's funny how the "I am an animal" pitch can work in your favor once in a while. See, you get the job, and I know a lot of this is I guess street freak in a nutshell. If somebody wants to go deep, that's the place they should look for the whole Lehman experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to leave some of that to read or people listening because it's worth the read. Give me the Lehman experience in a nutshell. What's the arc of Jared Dillian at Lehman Brothers?
I got a job doing index arbitrage, which was the worst possible job that was available. Index arb was a trade that was becoming more automated, electronic, and was going to disappear in a couple of years. And I got the tail end of it. And I distinguished myself in that job, and I was offered to be the head of ETF trading. And when I took over the ETF desk, it was making about 22 million a year. And in 4 years, it was making 90 million a year. And we had gone from being the number 7 or 8 desk in terms of market share to number 2. But it was incredibly stressful. And Lehman was incredible. Lehman was just an incredible place. It was crazy, but it was incredible. How'd
the Lehman experience compare to like the Coast Guard experience, just in form of, I don't want to say culture shock, but kind of like, was the animal just unleashed? The Jared Dillian animal unleashed once he got to Lehman, just in structure and abilities to do things?
Well, the first thing I had to learn was that there are no rules. I learned this very early on. There's no rules. So when we were in the associate training program, we had basically interviews with the trading desk to see where we would end up. And they said, the management, the recruiters said, don't go to the desks outside your interview time, right? Just go for your interview. So like, I'm coming from the military, so I'm like, yes, sir. And that's what I do. And then I go to the trading floor and all my classmates are like schmoozing with the desks, like not in their interview times. And I'm like, hey, what the hell? Like this, you're not supposed to be doing this. What's going on? And that was like my first inclination that there's just no rules. Like the rules are optional. Like you can do whatever you want. It's like, so, and the way Lehman was, and this is pre Dodd-Frank, but if you had an idea of how to make money, you did not have to ask permission. Like you could just do it. And if you made money, then you were a hero. And if you lost money, then nice try, do it again. That was the attitude. So, I was the head of ETF trading, but I was doing all kinds of stuff outside of ETFs. I was trading index rebalances, and I was trading commodities, and I was trading currencies and rates. And, I literally opened an account without asking anybody and just started trading macro in it, like that. And I was successful. I was making 20, 30 million a year, like trading prop, and they were like, great. So
great. We appreciate your profitability. Say you mentioned this with the military experience about how much of your experience is determined basically by your peers and your commanding officer. Did that show up in the same way in your arc at Lehman once you got in there? Like the people you were around, either on the desk and otherwise, and the person who your boss was, or did that all fall apart in a different way at Lehman?
I was in derivatives. I was with a really good group of guys, and I get along with my boss and my boss's boss and everybody. Politics For somebody who's a VP, I would say politics matters less. Once you get to be an MD, then it's all politics, but for somebody like me, I was very productive. I was very profitable. So, I was getting pay, I was getting promotions. Like it wasn't, I was one of the big producers. So,
What's the end of Lehman like? What happens? What's the end of your arc there?
well, about the summer of 2008, the stock was just in free fall. And, our hedge fund clients, like I would go out to dinners with hedge funds and they're like, you guys are going bankrupt. And I'm like, no, we're not. They're like, yes, like you absolutely are going bankrupt. Like everybody except for people at Lehman knew that the stock was going to zero, that we were going bankrupt. So around the summer of 2008, I was kind of doing a half-assed job of looking for jobs. What I wanted to find was like a buy-side execution role where I could trade some prop or whatever, and I just couldn't do it. But meanwhile, while I'm at Lehman, I have this distribution list where I'm writing this market commentary, these newsletters that is exploding. And I had several thousand people on my distribution list. And I said, look, I can, I was at the time I was getting Garmin, right? And I'm like, this guy has the best job in the world. I can just, I loved writing, so I can just, publish a newsletter. So that's what I decided to do after the bankruptcy.
Was the initial letter pure email? Like, are you late enough in the stage of these things that you're just doing an email newsletter?
It was over Bloomberg.
Okay. So it's just like through Bloomberg, this was
Yep.
the distribution mechanism for
Yep.
the original thing. And what was the cadence then? Was it daily in the morning? What was the cadence at the beginning?
I said it pretty much every day, although not every day. It wasn't necessarily in the morning. It was just kind of whenever I had an idea,
Macro trade ideas, everything. Was it really broad or how narrow was it at the beginning?
It was very broad. And, like with my style, like the writing was obviously very good and it was funny. And a lot of people just subscribed to it because it was funny, so.
Is that an edge? Just making people laugh at stuff?
Yes.
Or appreciate it. It boggles my mind how many things are like, are you an amusing person? If you're an amusing person, do you know how many doors open to you just because you're entertaining? So you start writing the newsletter post Lehman bankruptcy. So you just give up the job search. You're just like, I'm just going to focus on this right now.
Yeah.
And then newsletters famous for how easy they are to monetize. Right. I say this in,
Well, I mean,
what did you do to make a business out of this, or did you not care?
No, I made a business out of it. So it's kind of like starting a hedge fund. Like if you're starting a hedge fund, everyone's like, oh, I'll give you $1 million, I'll give you 500,000, whatever. And then when it comes time to write the check, that everybody disappears, So I had lots of indications of interest from people that they wanted to subscribe to the newsletter. And of course, this is during the financial crisis, right? So everything's terrible.
Everybody's got money to throw around on things like fun Bloomberg newsletters. Yeah.
But in my first year, I made $235,000 in my first year
on the newsletter. Not bad for send on an email, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay. And then what happens with the newsletter? Does it just keep snowballing from there?
Yeah.
What's the next business that you bolt on either on top of or adjacent to the newsletter?
Well, in 2014, I started working with Malden Economics. So I started writing for them and I did more newsletters, and they have a big marketing machine. So they were able to do some marketing for the Daily Dirt app. So I went from, a couple hundred subscribers to about 4,000 subscribers, in 2021. It's actually a little smaller now. But yeah, I mean, it's been a great business. So.
And I think it's because I look back to that post-financial crisis period and I think about all the different people that probably Malden and that whole team. How many people I've still followed along since that. That was kind of a special crop of people in the post-financial crisis world that he sort of helped.
Yeah. And the other thing is that in 2008, there weren't that many people publishing financial content. There was Gartman, there was James Grant, there was a couple other newsletters, but there weren't that many. And, one of the reasons I'm actually off my high watermark is because there's so much freaking competition now. Like everybody is starting some kind of publication or some kind of service. So, it's, like the Daily Dirt Nap is a Wall Street institution by this point. It's been around for 16 years.
Right.
But there's always like a new thing, so.
Welcome to the business, right? When's the book writing start? When's the first book happen?
So, what happened was when I was at Lehman and I was writing those Bloomberg messages, there was a young guy on my list who was forwarding them to a literary agent, who said, and he was saying, you should check this guy out. He's a really good writer. So when Lehman went bankrupt, this is like early 2009, he approached me about writing a book about Lehman. And I told him no. I said, I don't want to do that. Like, I don't want all the drama. Like, I don't want to do that. And he went away for like 6 months and he came back and he's like, come on. You really gotta write a book about Lehman. So at that point I said, okay. So I think I signed a book deal. So basically I wrote a proposal and it got sent around and I actually had 4 publishers interested. There was an auction. Simon & Schuster bought the book. This was in like, I think late 2009. And then I had, a year to write the book. So
that's book number 1. Does writing that book give you the bug for wanting to write more?
No,
or did
absolutely not.
Okay.
No.
Is this part of why, and this is worth saying, so say this out loud, like you didn't turn around and write another version of that book or a part 2 or something else?
No.
Inconsistent in a very interesting way here.
Well, yeah, I really wanted to write a novel. I had a great idea for a novel. So I write this novel and I take it to my agent and he sent it around to a couple places, but basically the novel was too dark, too dirty, too Wall Street focused. Great writing, but I couldn't sell it. So I said, screw you, like I'll self-publish it. So I ended up doing kind of like a hybrid, traditional self-publishing. My agent is at Writer's House, which is one of the big literary agencies, and they had a digital publishing imprint. So I published it on that. And it was reasonably successful. It sold a couple thousand copies. I'm very proud of that book. But like I said, it is the filthiest book you will ever read. It is off the charts, NC-17, like, and the reviews are funny. Like if you go on Amazon and look at the reviews for that book, it's called All the Evil of This World. Like people are like, I threw it in the trash. I threw it against the wall. They're like, I made it 20 pages. Like,
which is a compliment in its
it
own
is a
right.
compliment. Yeah.
It's a compliment in its own right. So just keep on the literary path for a second. So you do Street Freak, then you try your hand at fiction. You have your own experience with that. And then is it more short stories that start next, or are we into what's the personal finance book?
So I didn't write a book again for 7 years. Okay.
That's a good break.
Yeah. And I didn't want to.
Then you came back.
All the Evil of This World was an incredibly hard book to write. It was incredibly hard. The degree of difficulty, it was like a triple Lindy of books, because
thank you.
There's 7 characters, there's 7 chapters. It's all a couple hours out of their day and they all interconnect. So the engineering of the book is very complicated. So I was so burned out from writing that book. I was like, I have no desire to write another book. And then what happened was a couple of things were going on. I wanted to write a personal finance book. Then that was going to become No Worries. And at the same time, I had started a Substack, where I was writing essays just about life and stuff, which is We're Going to Get Those Bastards. So I had a collection of essays that I wanted to turn into a book. And I sold it to Harriman House along with No Worries. So they were going to publish both books.
So it was a package deal, basically, for
package deal, yeah.
Kind of disparate ideas.
Yeah. So what happened was, the book was going through the editing process, and there's essays about sex dolls, and there's essays about porn, and there's essays about, whatever. And Harriman House.
Perfect tee up for a personal finance, for the record.
Harriman House is like, we really don't want to be associated with this. So we changed our minds. We are not publishing this book. But they said, what we'll do is we will self-publish it for you. So they basically published the book and just didn't put the Harriman House name on it. And the book was hugely successful. It sold like 5,000 copies. It did really well. And No Worries was a massive hit. So.
Well, there you go. I mean, if Harriman House ever wants to lick their wounds and, rebrand with, I don't know, Harrison S&M Dungeon or something, you'll be ready for the imprint. So No Worries. Let's touch on this one a second, because No Worries is not your average personal finance book. I deeply appreciated some of the stuff, some of the conventions that you took head on in this book in your way. At memory, I don't think there was a lot of debauchery in that book, but there was a lot of great stories. What made you want to write this personal finance book?
So I was doing a radio show on personal finance. It was every night. It was 2 hours a night. And I was a call-in show, and people would call in and ask questions. And what I noticed was, number one, people were really stressed out about money. And number two, people were making choices that were causing them to be stressed out about money. And so I started to focus on this concept of financial stress, right? And I came to the conclusion that financial stress is all man-made. It's totally avoidable. And it's all about how you structure your affairs, right? So you can structure your affairs in such a way that you never experience financial stress. And financial stress is a terrible kind of stress because it compounds other kinds of stress. So if you have marriage stress, if you have work stress, if you have kid stress, like financial stress just makes it all worse, and it's unnecessary, right? So I wanted to write a book about that.
Do you feel like you succeeded? How do you feel about that book now that you're, a year past it, 2 years past it?
I do feel like it was a fantastic book. It got great reviews. I thought that it would be like The Psychology of Money. I thought I was going to be the next Morgan Housel. I thought it would sell 6 million copies. I thought it was this really great idea. And it sold 16,000 copies, which is pretty good as far as books go. But it never really caught fire. So, and that's the thing about books. Like, you cannot predict, like, even publishers have no idea what is going to succeed. So.
No, there's a lot of randomness to what works and what doesn't. And I wonder with that book, and I think I've heard you say this in some other places too, this is a book that I think actually has broader appeal to a younger generation that may or may not be harder to reach in that format. I don't know if that's the reason for it, but I get the sense from a lot of conversations I have with either not far after college grads or, like, say 30 somethings these days, who just your sentiment about what you called the awesome portfolio in that, where that would make a lot of sense to a different demographic than somebody who's 50 years old and already in the system.
Yeah.
Did you feel that in writing it? Like, it's kind of hard to change the 50-year-old with how they think about this, but it might make a lot more sense to somebody at the earlier
Well,
start
the funny
of the curve.
thing is that my audience is primarily 50-year-olds.
I know.
Right.
And that was not
Yes.
my problem with the book, but I was like, are the wrong people going to read this?
Yes.
Then who need to read this?
So if you look in the reviews of that book on Amazon, they're all like, oh, young people should read this book. Every young person should read this book. And I never really cracked the nut of, like, how to get that book in the hands of young people, So what I did not want to do is open a TikTok account and start doing TikTok videos with the book. Like, that's where I draw the line. So,
I mean, let's be clear here. You doing TikTok videos and TikTok dances to, explaining the CF concept. I mean, I might subscribe to TikTok for that. I'm just saying. The turn between that book and then going, I'm going to throw my hat in the ring here and do something like Night Moves. Like, is it the end of that book where you go get the MFA and then you fall into this? What's the connection between those two, or was there no connection?
So there's 16 short stories in Night Moves, and I wrote about 5 or 6 of them in my MFA program. Um, and writing short stories is the hardest thing you can possibly do and the most fun thing you can possibly do. It is, I had so much fun writing this book. Um, and I think I'm pretty good at it. So, but I'm a big consumer of short stories. Like I do subscribe to literary magazines. I buy short story collections. I bought one. I was in Connecticut a couple of weeks ago. I went to a bookstore, bought a short story. I love short stories. Like it's, I would much rather read a short story than a novel. So
Give me some of your top current or modern short story for people. Who are some of your favorites recently? To the extent I'm pulling it.
I'm like a throwback to the 90s. It's all
Well,
like all my favorite
obvious.
stuff is from the
If
90s.
anybody reads you, that's obvious. All right, so give me some 90s. Give me some tops.
Robert Olin Butler, Tobias Wolff, Mona Simpson, Jeffrey Eugenides, Jonathan Franzen. I mean, Junot Diaz is good.
I was going to ask if you're a Junot Diaz guy because you have Drown written all over you.
I mean, Junot Diaz is kind of a one-note samba. Like he writes about Bergenline and like nothing else. Like, so, I mean, and there's people like that, like Annie Proulx. Like she wrote 100 short stories about Wyoming, and one of them was Brokeback Mountain and became a movie. And
again, back to you can't predict what's gonna catapult. That's a solid list. What's next? So it's the hardest thing and the most fun thing. Would you do it again?
I would do it again. Yeah.
Do you think you will? I mean, did you self-publish this one, or did you go?
This one is strictly self-published. Yeah. So I also took this to my agent, and this is, I kind of get into this in the introduction. The introduction to the book is the most important part of the book.
Which I think, did you share that as either a blog post or a newsletter post or something else?
I shared a variation
another
of
place.
I shared a variation of it. Yeah.
Well, if somebody should if you're watching this, just buy a copy of the book. He self-published it. Support the man a little bit. And I agree. That was a very important statement that almost is separate from the book, and how important of an artistic statement it is.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I had this conversation with my agent, and he's like, look, I can't put this anywhere because this isn't the type of fiction that publishers are buying. And what I said to him was, I'm like, the publishers are idiots. Like, if they publish this book, it will sell. People will like this book. Publishers don't know what works. They also kind of don't care about money. They don't really give a shit if it sells 500 copies or 50,000 copies. They don't care, So, this book has sold 1,700 copies in 2 weeks, which the average short story collection sells about 500. So this is doing well. But I wish, it gets back to this contempt prior to investigation again. Like people are like, oh, I don't like short stories. Well, maybe you don't like short stories because you only have read ones that suck. Like, they all suck right now. So you think they all suck, and this does not suck. So.
Any desire to ever branch out in other medium or media? Like, not just like the radio and the podcast and the other stuff you're doing, but would you ever do a movie? Would you ever do a TV show? Would you ever do short film?
I want to learn how to write screenplays. So one thing about my writing is that the prose is not excellent. It's not as good as some writers, but my dialogue is really, really good. My dialogue is fantastic. And I've always thought I could write a good screenplay. And when I was at SCAD, I wanted to take a screenwriting class, but I couldn't fit it in my schedule. So I've actually thought about just going back and paying $3,000 and taking a screenwriting class. So yeah, I would love to do that. I want to do a screenplay for All the Evil of This World, but I'm hoping that I can get one short story in here option for film. 200 hours, I think would make an incredible rom-com. Like it, with, very funny, like picture 2003 with like Luke Wilson and Rachel McAdams, right? Like 200 hours, like it would be a great rom-com. Like, I think that would be perfect. So
it's just the counter to The Notebook the world needs. I could say that. I'm here to say though that I do think you already write like that enough in that, and again, this goes back to the rhythm and actually, I don't want to say the lack of prose, that feels somehow insulting, but the type of, not anti-prose. Do you have a way that you describe this? Your prose resistance, my behavior. Whatever that is, it puts much more emphasis on each character, each sentence, each piece of dialogue, advances plot. And that's something you see when you read a screenplay that you don't see when you read literary fiction. That awareness of plot advancement, and your writing contains that in multitudes. So take that all the way to the non-existing piggy bank that pays you a nickel at a time. That's where this is going. Besides the next short story book, like what else is big on what you're working on now?
Well, I have another essay collection done. So that's going to be coming out next year. I signed a contract with Harriman House for the Awesome Portfolio. The Awesome Portfolio is going to be a book. So I'm doing a book on the Awesome Portfolio. And so after that,
how to market that to people younger. I'm just saying, as somebody in the industry, I want that book for second or third generation people to be able to hand to and read.
Yeah. I need somebody who's really has a big Reddit presence to post about it. But after that, and we're talking 2027 now, I am working on a novel that is dystopian fiction. And I think it would be, I'm kind of stepping away from the literary fiction. I think it would be great commercial fiction, great film potential, like the Hunger Games or something like that. It could be really good. So I'm starting to work on that.
Does Lehman Brothers era Jared Dillian recognize this current iteration of Jared Dillian?
No.
Why not? Just total foreigner, who the hell is this guy? What have I done with my life? Or all those little inclinations, they're finally getting realized.
Yeah. No, I mean, I love the newsletter. I've been doing it for 16 years. It makes enough money and it doesn't take up a huge amount of time so that I have time to pursue these other things, which I really, really like to do. You a bunch of books, that people can enjoy for decades to come, so that's my legacy.
I'm excited for this turn of legacy, and I'm excited that, and actually this question too, did Lehman need to end to put you on this track?
Yes.
If that wasn't ripped out from underneath you, if that wasn't the end of that company, do you ever get here? Or is this I have to wait till you're 60 till I get this conversation?
I never would have left. I would still be there. Still be there.
Because you were just hooked to it? You were just on the junk, so to speak, and that's it?
I was also making a lot of money. It's kind of hard to walk away from the money, so.
I got notes. Let's go through some of these. I invite you to interrupt as often and with anything you can think of with this. I'd love at the top, just this idea of being critically successful versus commercially successful, and the decision to balance that in your mind with so few examples of people who pull this off to actually go get the MFA at 46. That's another thing that, for all the CFA and CFP and all the alphabet soup ambitions on the world, to go MFA 46. I want more of these stories. I just want to hear more of these stories from people who said, yeah, it was time. And you're glad you did it. You learned a lot from the program.
I did. Yeah. And the story of how I decided to do that was, it was the pandemic. It was 2020 or 21. And there was nothing to do, so I went camping. Camping was one thing you could do in a pandemic, right? So we went camping in North Carolina in the middle of the summer. It was ungodly hot, and we got in the tent, and it was like a sauna. And I'm like, I cannot sleep in this tent. So I get out of the tent and I sit in the chair by the fire, and I never went back in the tent. I sat in the chair all night, the entire night, for 8 hours. And I just thought about my life. And I thought about this idea that, when I was 22, I wanted to get an MFA. I wanted to write short stories and be a professor somewhere or something like that. And I gave up that dream to go to Wall Street. And I said, I want to go back to that. So it was 3, 4 in the morning that night in the summer, sitting by the fire, that I made that decision. We drove home the next day. The first thing I did was I got on my laptop and I applied to SCAD. So
Were you scared? Were you nervous about the commitment to the program, or was it such like a pivotal, I need to acquire this knowledge, I need to reset this path?
I underestimated how difficult it would be. I underestimated how difficult it would be. In SCAD, it's a good writing program. It's not one of the best. It's not Iowa. But I thought it would be a cakewalk. I thought I would get just breeze through it, get all A's. I wouldn't have to do any work. And it was hard. It was really hard. And part of the curriculum were 2 art classes, a contemporary art class and an art criticism class. It's like one of the hardest things I've ever done. I never taken an art class in my life. So yeah, I learned a ton of stuff.
Are you a museum guy?
Now I am.
Even without the art class, I would have pegged you as a museum guy. Now you
I
are.
wasn't until I got an appreciation for it.
Did you ever set foot in a museum up to that
Oh
point?
yeah, sure.
Yeah, but
don't
you
know
were
what you're
just
looking at.
So you're just like, cool, fine, whatever.
Yeah.
That's pretty. That's not.
Yeah.
Now, if you go to a museum, what's it like now? Post that experience.
I mean, now I can identify, modernism versus postmodernism, and I can, look it through all these critical lenses, through like a Marxist lens or a feminist lens or whatever. Like, this is all stuff I learned in class. So,
Do you feel like exposure to stuff like that type of education on lenses to apply to see things, is that one of the things that's missing? Like, you get the TikTok lens, you don't get the how to read short stories lens these days.
I don't know.
Bigger philosophical questions. We talked about the sense of rhythm, the drum major piano thing, your frustration with the guitar. I'm just going to be endlessly amused by that. This idea that your mom balked at the bill for WPI. Like, that's another one of those crazy, your life goes down a different path if she's just like, yep, WPI, reputable school, makes sense. Did you and your mom ever get to revisit that ever?
She says she doesn't remember the conversation. So,
Okay.
yeah.
We won't call her out on that here. It's our business, calling out moms on promises made long ago. Do you feel like, what's your sense? Would your life have gone, had you gone to WPI? Do you ever end up at this point?
Oh, I mean, my life takes a completely different path for sure.
Because then you're math.
Oh. Yeah.
You're a math guy.
Yeah.
It's interesting. The military performance being dictated by your peers and your commanding officer. I think that's so interesting because I just feel like so often in life, this is it. And right back to like your wife and meeting her when you're 15 at summer camp or whatever. That's a great story for another day, perhaps. But the people you surround yourself and the people who have any authority over your life, that you give that you choose to give that authority to.
Yep.
That's a determining factor almost at every stage, it feels like. Do you agree with that?
Yeah. And the other thing I give advice to young kids about is, people sort of have this very naive belief that if they do the best job at their job, then they will get paid the most and they will get promoted the most. All that really matters is how good you are at your job. I mean, that's not the case anywhere in the world, right? What matters is that you are friends with your boss, like good friends with your boss. Your job is not your job. The thing that you do is not your job. Your job is to be friends with your boss. If you want to do a good job, then great, do a good job, but also be friends with your boss, right? Like, that's the most important thing,
My favorite conversation personally, anytime I get to talk to a young person about career advancement or whatever, especially like early to mid, even late 20s, is tell me about your boss. How old is that? How old is he or she? And it's always like, why does that matter? It's like, tell me how old, tell me maybe what kind of car they drive or whatever else. Here's the movies you need to go watch. Yeah, go watch those. And then I'm going to tell you how to talk to your boss. Because more often than not, it's like, once I know the generation, then it's like, are we godfathering them? Are we princess briding them? Are we notebooking them? Are we caddyshagging them?
Yeah.
Like, what is the flank to their childhood that you need to run? And I think this is a beautiful segue to like your point about everybody thinks that humans are emotional and irrational. So then more irrational is the answer, all the behavioral finance literature in the world. And no. The more irrational or embracing the irrational, your pitch to Lehman Brothers to actually go out and say like, I am an animal. The first realization is like, there are no rules. Forget the rules to Fight Club. Like the first rule is like, there actually are no rules. You need to assess the way you play this game.
Yep.
I feel like that's also both that pitch and then that realization on the interviews between the desks. That's a real transformational educational moment in you trade. All right. And I'm going to keep you here forever if I don't bring this to a close at some point here. I got to say on the Amazon, the writer of the reviews of some of these things, I need to go. I'm going to encourage anybody watching this to not only leave a review, but I think we could make a sugar-free gummy bears level, like separate genre of fiction inside of the Jared Dillian comments on these books. I don't know if I can lead that charge, but are you familiar with the Haribo sugar-free gummy bears literary fiction?
No.
You can get that going for you. You're not familiar with this?
What is this?
I'm going to ruin the rest of your day in the best way possible. Haribo sugar-free gummy bear reviews, Amazon, maybe just Google it. It's a actual form of fiction that emerged in the comments section of a product with certain disastrous gastroenterological impacts on people's life.
I think I know where you're going with this. Yeah.
It's really good. I love that you're thinking about impact now at 50. I love that this is the focus. And I think that helps contextualize so much of how you can get something like Night Moves and No Worries being so different just in the last very brief period of time. Made me go like, what is going on in this guy's head? I've got to get him onto one of these. Jared Dillian, tell the people where to find you if they want to learn more, if they want to check out the books, all the things.
So we got Night Moves. Damn it, you got to buy this book. It is the best short story collection you will ever read. One of the blurbs here is, I dare you to stop reading after one story. Okay. So it is good. It is addictive. You want to buy Night Moves. My author website is jareddillian.com. If in case you want to subscribe to the newsletter, it's dailydirtnap.com. If you mention the podcast, then you can have a discount. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Where's the money? You have the money website too, I think.
jareddillianmoney.com. Yeah.
And that's for
that's my personal finance company. Yeah.
Which I think is increasingly important in some of the work you're doing. I'll encourage, especially this audience, give that a look, and especially give that a look if you're dealing with like second and third generation with clients or anybody else in your life or personal life. Really cool. Jared Dillian, truly an intentional investor. Thank you so much for the time today.
Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe wherever you're watching The Intentional Investor so more people can find our show. You can follow Matt directly at cultishcreative.com or at cultishcreative on Twitter. For more great content at the intersection of investing and life, check out epsilontheory.com or at epsilontheory on Twitter.